Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. How is the weather at your end?
Very good today, as the usual British weather, they say. 1 minute you walk out of the house, you need your coat. The next minute you come back and it's so hot. So a few days ago, there was snow outside. Not something we expect at this time of the year, but that's what we were faced with. Unexpected developments.
1 minute, all your banks are functioning. Next minute, you don't know if you have any banks.
Well, maybe I will ask you a question about banks, because I know you once said to me that you are not an economist, but there's actually quite a bit on that front that I'm going to ask you about. But tonight, sir, let me start with something that you've always said when it comes to US and Russia.
Thank you so much for inviting me on a special occasion. Thank you, sir.
We are, thank you very much for that. You said at the time that one day something will happen that could then cause a bit of an issue between the US and Russia. And a few days ago, we saw one of such occasions. And I would love to get your response to the Russian jet that struck a US drone and sent that drone into the Black Sea. What's your take on that, sir?
Well, thank you very much for reminding me of something which I have said earlier on.
Well, we still have bees.
And
yeah, we'll mute also in a sec. Just bear with me.
And then, do you still have meat?
Yes, sir. Just bear with me. Okay. All right. Go on, sir. Apologies about that.
No, not at all. But the picture is frozen on my end.
I am experiencing a few technical issues on this end. I will ask the team to make an adjustment to that as we go on, sir. Please bear with me.
You can hear me.
We can hear you, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Lovely, lovely. The voice is better than the face anyway. Yes, thank you for reminding me of one truth which I put out there at the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war, which is that I don't believe a third world war will start deliberately by either the Russians or the Americans, but that an accident can happen. Somebody did not get the message right, misinterpreted the message he got, a malfunctioning of a system, which then leads to Russia and America shooting down each other's planes or facility or a ship or whatever it is. And that's what has just happened. The United States has put out the video of actually what happened. And let us thank the age of the media and the social media so we could see it ourselves. While the Russians were denying the sequence of the occurrence, they didn't know that the Americans will put out the video. Now you could say what happened. Now, the issue really is that in war, countries often extend what one will call the boundary of their surveillance or the boundary of their military exercise beyond the normal boundary. For example, even in peacetime, both the United States and the Soviet Union, and actually all the superpowers, will have a line of strategic incursion, which is way out into the sea, which any approaching plane must identify itself. Now, that strategic line is actually already in international waters, but all of them do it. Then after that strategic line, there will be another line which allows the approaching country or the country that is being approached to scramble its planes while warning approaching aircraft that you are going into military territory or whatever language they use. Then there will be a third line where you are now told, if you cross this line, you risk being shot down. And usually by the time foreign planes get to that middle line or second line, they veer off. But they've just tested the readiness of the other side. That's really what usually happens. So what the Soviet Union is saying, what the Russians are saying in this case is that given the war going on with Ukraine, you cannot regard the Black Sea now as international waters, which by definition of international law of the sea, it actually is. But by convention, parties involved in a military conflict are allowed to draw these, imaginary lines, and which are usually respected. And that for the Americans to claim that they have the right under international law to fly as they please over the Black Sea, not taking cognizance of the fact that there is a war going on and that actually part of the area of operations extends into the Black Sea. Don't forget that about 6 months ago or thereabouts, a Russian naval ship was actually sunk in that area. We don't know. The Russians said a missile exploded within its launching pad. The Ukrainians said otherwise. And also don't forget that it was supposed to have been an operation by special naval forces of Ukraine that blew up that bridge linking Crimea with Ukraine. With Russia itself. So really, there are military activities going on in that area. So, but however, I must point out with admiration that the Americans have not rushed into saying this was a deliberate act. They really think it was an accident. But while also letting the Russians know that the accident happened because of the recklessness of the Russian pilots, whether those pilots were deliberately instructed to bring that drone down. Because when you collide with an aircraft, whether a drone or regular civilian aircraft, you've damaged it. The only thing that's going to happen is that it will crash. So the Americans said they are not sure whether the high echelon of the Ministry of Defense in Russia actually told them to bring it down, or whether they just told them, harass the aircraft and let us see what will happen. And somewhere along the line, somebody went beyond these instructions. It's also instructive that the Americans have not brought Putin into this. They've located the responsibility within the Ministry of Defense. So let's keep our fingers crossed and hope there won't be any more accidents. But the Americans have said they're going to continue to exercise their right to fly over the Black Sea.
But sir, you touched on it briefly, and I want to call out that point. Surely for the Americans, they should have known better than to fly their drone in that area. And maybe they should have avoided that completely. And maybe this is actually an act of provocation by the Americans themselves.
Well, you are right. But in this undefined war, the Americans and the Russians, both sides, are going to find out the limit of their exercise, and not just not just take the attitude that we can't go too far and provoke the Russians, or we can't do this and provoke the Americans. It will be, let us see how far we can go. And the Americans made the point that they have been exercising their right of overflight since the conflict started, and that they don't see any reason why they will change their attitude. I think another factor we should keep at the back of our minds is that this was a drone that was used and not a manned aircraft, because that changes the whole equation. If there was an American pilot on board a manned aircraft that was shot down, I mean, definitely the response of the Americans would be more than, we are going to try this another time. And they will, just to find out whether the Russians are again going to send out aircraft to intercept the drone. In this situation, each side is going to find out how far it will go. And so my initial fear of an accident waiting to happen is still there.
Thank you, sir. Let me go back to a point you raised at the beginning. I know you said you are not an economist, but you brought it up, so I'm going to ask the question. In the United States, a very major bank, I think the 16th largest bank, went into receivership. And the impact of that brought back memories of the I think it was the 2008 financial crash and the impact of Lehman Brothers going down. The aspect of it I want to ask, sir, is from a foreign relations and a foreign policy perspective, to what extent will that kind of issue impact, one, investors going into that country, and number two, any sort of relations that financial investments that may be flowing from the US into other countries like in Africa, to what extent would that now start to weaken the position of the US in being a superpower in that area?
Okay, I asked for it. President Roosevelt, not Theodore, the Second World War president, was once holding a cabinet meeting, and an issue arose over finance, and he asked a question from his Treasury Secretary, that's the American equivalent of the Minister of Finance. So the Secretary of Finance said, Mr. President, on one hand, and President Roosevelt said, stop right there. Can somebody just get me an economist with one hand? These issues, there are no specific answers, everlasting answers to them. And I think this is borne out by the fact that the European Minister of Finance, if you can use that term, their bank, their central bank, decided to increase the interest rate by 0.5% because they saw inflation as the major problems European economy will have to face. Whereas the American central bank was more cautious that if they increased interest rates in a bold move, more banks may even crash because the move will affect the liquidity of American banks. So the issue that faces us, I think, is one, when American sneezes, when American catches a cold, the rest of the world starts to sneeze. And I will advise every bank in the world to look at the liquidity profile of their big banks to ensure that the disease that started in the United States does not flow into the global South banking system, because all of them are interlinked, all of them are interchanged. That's the first point. The second point also is that the lesson to me is that each country will have to come up with autochthonous solution to whatever problems it has. And not to say, well, the Americans did this, therefore we also must do that. Or the Europeans did this, therefore we also must do that. Look at your own financial environment. Look at the exposure of your bank to external, forces. See to what extent you can insulate in the short term your banking system from this virus that is coming from abroad. Thirdly, the Americans played games with the whole world, but they didn't deceive anybody. The Americans didn't use the term that they were rescuing their banks from collapse. They simply talked about securing securing deposits. Now, under the American financial regulation, the insurance covers only $250,000. But from day one, the president announced, and the Secretary of Treasury has confirmed that all deposits are guaranteed. You will get your money back. So in other words, insurance or no insurance, the government will make sure you get your deposits back. And so when the Americans then start to preach undiluted undiluted capitalism to the rest of the world, that if a bank wants to collapse, you let it collapse. You let the depositors, take it on the chin. One will have to remind them that you didn't let your own banks, there are two now, I believe there are three banks that have collapsed, out that were on the verge of collapsing, and that you needed to use government funds, we basically are taxpayers' money. Because yes, you could print more dollars and pump that into the banking vault. But at the end of the day, it is still the taxpayers' funds, that you will use to pay off the overdraft and the debt and what have you. Now, that's the limit of my own knowledge, and that's the limit of my own analysis. I have often been worried about the speed with which new banks spring up and start pumping money into new sectors of the economy, like all these tech companies. The relationship between the Bitcoin and what have you, that doesn't seem to be backed up by anything, the link, because banks must lend them money for them to even set up, Bitcoin companies. I mean, they print, their gold coins and so on. The exposure of banks to these untested areas of the economy, I've often wondered about it, but since I'm not an economist, I felt those who know better than I do have taken care of the problem. But now we are starting to find out that no, they haven't taken care of the problem. The problem is going to arise. And my fear, and this is going to be my last word on this, is that we haven't had the last of the incipient banking collapse in the US and in Europe. Because don't forget that one of the banks in the United Kingdom had to be rescued by somebody paying the $1 for it, that was his value, simply in order to rescue from collapsing and to secure depositors' funds.
Let me go to an issue that came up in the course of the week, and this is regarding China and China's foreign policy in the Middle East. We had talked about the fact that China was being more vocal, and I think with the appointment of a new foreign minister. But we now see China in a position where they've been able to broker a sort of arrangement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And some have talked about the extent to which that is going to affect the role of the United States in the Middle East. What is your view on China's role in that arrangement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and what that may mean for general diplomatic relations between the Middle East and the rest of the world?
Well, I must say it caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting to see Chinese fingerprints in that part of the world. But that was not the only thing that caught me by surprise. The other thing that caught me by surprise, well, I knew that there have been behind the scenes contacts between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I believe Iraq had tried to mediate something sometimes last year. but that didn't go anywhere. However, every little grain of sand in diplomacy is not to be ignored. Don't know what it will strengthen later on. But last week, we were focusing on Saudi Arabia's activist policy in the world when its foreign minister turned up in Ukraine, Washington, and Russia, not knowing that they even had a more spectacular move with which to surprise us. A lesson or a takeaway from this is that in this drive for a new world order, we should be open to surprises coming from any quarter. And perhaps we should stop saying what will be the effect on the United States. I made a point over 1.5 years ago that the dynamics of this new world order is going to see a descent by the United States, which had been used to a unipolar world, and an ascending actor, which is China. And the second point I made was that China has not overtaken the United States, but that the dynamics is already evident. America retreating, China coming up. Somewhere along the line, they're gonna meet. There will be a balance. And then whoever is going to be the big boy on the block will surface. So this is what we are starting to see. And the United States will just have to get used to the fact that this is no longer a unipolar world. Some people have even said this to be a bipolar world. I think it will be a multipolar world. And America will have to get used to the fact that they cannot go around threatening anybody who disagrees with them, which had been their knee-jerk reaction. You'll recall that when OPEC refused to lower prices and refused to increase supply of oil into the market, the United States, went with both fists into the chest of Saudi Arabia, threatening them with this, threatening them with that. And even now, one of the knee-jerk reactions of the United States arising from Saudi Arabian agreement with Iran is a resolution which has been tabled before the United States Senate, saying that, the State Department should be authorized to do a study of human rights, the state of human rights in Saudi Arabia. Where is that going to get the United States? Except to piss off Saudi Arabia more. That kind of thing will work in the days of the unipolar world, but not in the days of the bipolar world, not in the days of the multipolar world. And you will recall the faux pas by the American Secretary of State. As soon as they got into power, the very first meeting with the Chinese, the American Secretary of State was reeling off Chinese violations of human rights until the Chinese told them, how about in your own country? Have you guaranteed the rights of blacks in your own country? And give it back to them. That, when you come to equity, you come with clean hands. Your hands are also not clean. So we are in interesting times. Let me put it that way. I believe that the Saudis and the Iranians have come to a conclusion that both of them have not benefited from fighting proxy wars in the Mediterranean, and that they need to recalibrate their foreign policy. It hasn't paid them that they've been fighting in Yemen, they've been fighting in Iraq, they've been fighting in Syria, and that there are Iranian fingerprints all over the place, and the Saudis have felt that they needed to step up to the plate to confront the Iranians, that it hasn't benefited them. Instead, they have been losers, and that therefore they better try to dialogue on the issues that separate them and see how far. I mean, of course, one sparrow doesn't make a summer. I don't believe that all the problems between Saudi Arabia and Iran are solved by this one agreement. I think there are going to be several ones. And they have found an interlocutor, China, where because of its absence from that area, does not have interest to defend, is not carrying any baggage of, we have allies that, we cannot desert by having this agreement. That's the problem that the United States and Turkey are faced with in Syria. There are allies, local allies that are embedded there that are supplied financially and militarily on one side by the Americans, while there are also allies on the side of Turkey. So that relationship between the US and Syria, relationship between Turkey and Syria are adversely affected by the presence of these allies. China does not have that kind of a problem. So China actually has a freer hand as an interlocutor in these problem areas, and maybe because of that, may be more successful than the United States has been.
There's a question here, sir, from someone saying that when the Wagner Group founder said his goal in the Ukrainian war was to ensure that Russia is not disgraced and Russia's weapons are not defeated. I also know that the Americans have a maxim like this: American weapons should not be defeated in any war. Yet the prof is saying he cannot see the possibility of an escalation. Are we reading this war from a moralist perspective or from a realist perspective?
My apologies if I've given the impression that there cannot be escalation. There have been escalation from day one. In fact, I listened to one analyst say, if you want to describe the attitude of NATO towards the war, is we won't do this, we won't do this, we won't do this. Yes, we are doing it, we are doing it, we are doing it. We will not supply this kind of weapons. We won't supply this kind of weapons. We won't supply this kind of weapons. Yes, we are supplying this kind of weapons. This was the time when there was all this to and fro over the supply of tanks. So, as I said, I'm sorry if I've given the impression there has been. I mean, what this war has shown is, be careful. Once you step on a slippery slope. How you stop yourself is always the problematic thing, especially in war, because you often think, oh, well, the next step probably will be the solution. The other side will be frightened. And the other side doesn't get frightened. Instead, the other side say, well, not going to allow myself to simply, bow down just because they've done this. I have a retaliatory act, that I've been preparing. So they do that. And then the other side, well, but now is the time to put in artillery, latest artillery. You use that and you get a return share from the other side. Then you say it's time for tanks. Then it is time for aircraft. So no, that there is increased engagement all the time. But I hope, and knowing the Americans, because at times I sound like I criticize them all the time. I went to school with them, I know them. Knowing the Americans, there will be probably a task force already set up to decide where that line is going to be, where back channels will have to be found to the Russians about, let's call this off. I'm sure such a task force already exists. It cannot simply, unless by accident, it cannot be an everlasting war. You have to take into cognizance the mood of your people, the economic cost, even to the defense of Ukraine, so that even if Putin is saying he's going to fight to the last Russian, and Ukraine is saying it's going to fight to the last Ukrainian, the cost, the economic cost, even to the Russian economy, and the economic cost to NATO itself, they seem, they seem to have depleted their supply, their store of weapons. And of course, there will always be, people who are happy about war. The manufacturers of weapons are quite happy because you need to restock your supply of weapons, and that is their job, to ramp up the supply. But we are still at the stage where there is an escalation, stage by stage, going
on. There's an interesting point here, sir. This person is saying that we have seen China trying to play this sort of mediator role in foreign policy in other regions. We've seen, I think it was Brazil that came up with a policy that was going to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. China came up with a similar policy. Even India came up with something similar. Where are the African foreign ministers who are coming up with proposals on how to solve the issue? Why is Africa being so quiet on non-African related issues?
Because the so-called giant of Africa is still trying to sort itself out. It's been away from the scene for the past, I think on this program, I said we can go back to the death of Yaradua. So if you can date it back to that time, we had the president who lacked the confidence to step boldly into the world scene. And even though he had a ministry of foreign affairs, he had a national security advisor, and this and that, he wasn't prepared to step into that shoe. Then you've had followed by the President Buhari, who was ill probably for the first 2 or 3 years, and therefore was really not in a position to step in to bat for Nigeria and for Africa. South Africa that has tried. I was reading a piece last week where somebody was even warning that South Africa was in danger of becoming a failed state because of its domestic problems. So I go back to Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, even though he was president of South Africa, he knew the issues involved in the South African scene, said, until Nigeria sort itself out, Africa and the Black race will not play their role in world affairs. And Nigeria has not solved. We are going to have a new administration coming in hopefully 3, is it? Yes, 2 months time in May. This is March already. And let us hope the incoming president-elect that I know is not a novice in terms of engagement in international affairs, in terms of his understanding of global affairs. I don't know whether the problem he will inherit may prove to be a stumbling block to his engagement globally. But Nigeria is so full of talents. If only he would use these talents to help him build, stepping stones into the global order as it is. But that is the answer to your question, that Africa has been silent. We've been drawing attention to it. If Obasanjo was still the president of Nigeria, I think he would be doing the kind of thing that Lula, because you see, Lula's election and the new activism by Brazil shows the role of leadership. It shows the role of leadership. Brazil was a mess before Lula came back. They had a president, but the president was not sure-footed in international affairs. Lula came in, and within a couple of months, here he was visiting countries all over the world and, making Brazilian positions felt on issues that need to be addressed. So it's a question of leadership. One hopes that this election that has brought up a new president-elect will be a solution to our own problems.
Sir, but apart from the local challenges, does Africa have the credibility to be able to address some of these challenges that we see outside of Africa?
Yes, Africa does have the credibility. It depends on what you do with your assets and how you use your assets. Number one, let me clear one misconception, which only 2 days ago, I was addressing on another platform. Oh, Nigeria has this problem, Nigeria has that problem. Now, look at the problems that Pakistan has. Look at the problem that India has. And yet, these are countries whose voices are heard on the international scene. Apart from the fact that the two are nuclear powers. There's no country in the world that has finished solving its domestic problems before stepping into the global scene. There are ghettos in the United Kingdom. There are ghettos in the United States. And there are definitely ghettos and poor people in Russia. And there are poor people and ghettos in China. So Nigeria has poor people, Nigeria has ghettos, but you look at the resources that are accrued to Nigeria from one, export of agricultural products, two, export of crude oil, three, export of liquefied natural gas, and the dividends paid to Nigeria. The problem with Nigeria is that about half, if not more, of this is stolen by its elite. If you get a government that puts a tap on the outflow, illicit outflow of funds from Nigeria, it has enough resources to boost itself up. Because in spite of all this mess that Nigeria is in, we still have, I won't say the, but one of the strongest economies in Africa. And you can imagine if we stop stealing the resources of Nigeria, just how far we will go. It's only about 6 months ago that they told us how much of Nigerian crude was being stolen. And the outgoing government decided to do something about it. Within these few months, we've gone from 900,000 barrels of crude per day to 1.3 million barrels of crude oil a day, just by putting a stop to the leakage. That shows you, if you could just sustain that for years, not only in the crude oil section, but in all the economic sectors in Nigeria. I mean, minerals are stolen, mined, and flown out of this country without going through the government agencies that are supposed to police it for us. That is a vast area that you need to address. Corruption is the major problem that is preventing Nigeria and Africa from being visible in the international scene. Corruption.
Thank you, sir. There are two questions I want to pass before we go, sir, and get your comments on. One has to do with a BBC reporter or a presenter whose family have paid slavery reparations and has quit to focus on campaign of how they can get other people to start to contribute and atone for the role that their families paid in slavery. What do you think about the extent of to which this particular family has gone and this view that they have adopted?
You have used two critical terms: reparation and atonement. The Church of England and various institutions who have been involved in slavery and who, at the time slavery was abolished, were the ones paid reparations rather than the slaves themselves, have simply been verbal about their atonement. We are sorry for what we did. All right, you are sorry. How do you intend to how do you intend to pay for the atonement? How do you intend to pay for the reparations? You are still very, very rich institutions. Germany last year had laid, I would say, the foundation. Not adequate, but at least they've taken one step forward by agreeing to pay reparations to Namibia for the atrocities committed by Germany during the occupation of Namibia. Now, no other country has followed that. Instead, there is a debate in Belgium about, consequences for their treasury if they were even to apologize, since an apology may lead to reparations. Now, here is this young lady who I salute her moral courage. I appreciate her determination to actualize her apology, not only by resigning her job, but by committing the rest of her life to reparation and atonement for what her family did in owning slaves. That, to me, is a challenge, not to other families alone, but to all governments in the world, that you need to go beyond verbal apologies. You need to now take the next step towards reparation and towards atonement for the evil perpetrated over centuries to the Black race, and which is still responsible for where the Black race finds itself in the world today. I don't know the mechanism that will be put in place, but is it too late or is it too early to call on the United Nations to set up a task force, a study group on how to actualize reparation and atonement? Why the United Nations? Because as an institution, it was not in existence during slavery, so its hands are clean. I'm not naive. I concede that members of the United Nations were actually the same that were involved in that evil occurrence. But the United Nations is the only body we have that within its ambience can create an environment where this issue can be debated and discussed. And so I welcome the initiative of this lady. I appreciate what she's done, and I hope others will take a leave from her. It shows immense courage on her part. And I hope the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Pope, who are sitting on massive wealth accumulated during the process of slavery. Yes, the Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, all churches are involved in this. The same thing for the Muslims. And Saudi Arabia is stepping out now to assert itself internationally. I hope it will not forget that the Arabs were involved in the slave trade. Even before the Western countries stepped in, the Arabs had been enslaving Africans. I hope they will step forward, acknowledge their guilt, and come up with their own contribution to the process of reparation and atonement. I hope one of our scholars on this program will, will embark on a study of reparations and atonement.
There is actually a question here from someone. This person says, I think the question is pointing to a committee of some sort that was floated in the days of the late Chief MKO Abiola in Nigeria. Is that what the sort of thing you're advocating? I hope you recollect what this person is referring to.
Yes, I do. But once Abiola didn't get once his mandate was annulled and he got into his own trouble, that committee, yes, it was headed, I think, by, I've forgotten his name, one of the West Indian ambassador in Nigeria, who was an activist. And even he tried to get the OAU, and the OAU was responding to his initiative. But again, because it was not a government-sponsored thing. It's always difficult for individual initiatives in diplomacy to be sustained, especially after the miss of whoever it is that is sponsoring it. I will welcome. Building on that question. Maybe it is the African Union who should start it. After all, the African Union represents the continent that was most ravaged by slavery. The African Union has been rather reticent on this issue because of membership of the Arab countries in the African Union, because it's like, pointing fingers at some of your members, and they have found it difficult to do. Do we have a day where Israel has a day of atonement, one day of atonement, where the whole country comes to a stop to remember the victims of the Holocaust? Do we have a day when we remember victims of slavery in Africa? No, we don't. Maybe that will be a first step to ginger the conscience of the rest of the world. Let us first ginger our own conscience. Maybe this will be the first initiative of the new incoming administration in Nigeria.
All right, so let me end with this topic. Imran Khan, former Pakistani leader, seems to be getting himself in quite a lot of troubled waters. I think November, there was an alleged assassination attempt. And now there's been some demonstrations in his house over some soldiers wanted to arrest him from at home. What is he doing wrong, sir?
A lot, because there are charges. I think as of the last time, there are 68 charges filed against him in court. Just as there is at times a process called demonization of an individual, there is also at times a process called canonization of an individual. And what I can't understand is what is so special about Imran Khan that courts will order his arrest and his followers will refuse to allow him to be arrested just because he's been a former prime minister. It doesn't bode well for the development of the political process in Pakistan to have this either demonization or canonization. To me, if the court order your arrest, you surrender yourself. But he himself engineers his people, his supporters, to surround his house and be prepared, to defy the police. I've never heard of such a thing. It's so unique, I would say, to Pakistan. This rule of the mob. The slightest thing, you are going to start a march from Lahore all the way to Rawalpindi. You are going to start a march from here all the way to there. And all along, you are collecting, followers who follow you and are aggravating the situation. And then you are always talking about, about assassination attempts on your life, but you are provoking the emotions of the people. Governance. Pakistan has become an ungovernable country thanks to people like Imran Khan. So, no, but the precedent that he's setting, that somebody can be above the law and decide and determine, and it wasn't as if he was a successful prime minister when he was in office. In any way, he was just a cricketer, a successful cricketer. It was because the military backed him that in a rigged election, he became prime minister. And then forgetting who was propping him up, he now decided to challenge the authority of the military. And the military showed him who actually owns the power in Pakistan. And of course, you now decide you are going to be a saint in Pakistan, an untouchable saint in Pakistan. I think it sets a bad precedent for Pakistan, and I hope no other country in the global south will copy his antics and turn their countries into ungovernable countries.
Thank you very much, sir. I know I took you over time today. Apologies for that. But thank you, sir. Thank you to our viewers. And just a quick announcement, sir. We are working on the town hall where we want to debate the African identity. And over the coming weeks, maybe next week, we'll have some more details about that. And we'll give some firm dates on when that town hall is going to take place. But it will be definitely no later than April when that town hall will take place. And we'll discuss the African identity. Who is an African?
Okay. I'm so sorry, Wakanda didn't win any Oscar prize, but we keep trying.
We'll keep trying. We'll come back.
Wakanda forever.
Thank you, sir. Good night, sir.
Thank you.